My father used to say there's 3 stages of attractiveness. Don't he look cute? Don't he look handsome? And don't he look natural? And I'm still fighting. I hope I look natural. So I'm here today to talk about my experience developing a PSIRT capability for a standards org. My goal here is to present a template that other groups can use. I don't claim that it is thorough and complete. There may be things that need to be added, so I encourage the Q&A. And as I told Mike at the start, I believe that lecturing has been obsolete since the invention of movable type. You guys can download the slides later and look through them. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. The reason to have the presentation is to give you the opportunity to ask questions and discuss the topic. So keep that foremost. If you want to interrupt while I'm running, that's fine. If you want to wait, that's fine too. Goal of this talk, did that actually work? Yes. Quickly, this is about me and about the trusted computing group's circumstance. This really doesn't have much range on it, does it? Okay. I'll try not to be too close to it. I've been around a long time. I worked on the original Morris worm. I developed the first classes for Usenix. This was before SANS existed. So it's been a while. I was the first full-time PSIRT member at Cisco, and I've been involved with FIRST since 1990. That was the previous century. Maybe I do need to worry about looking natural, Brian. When I was employed at Juniper Networks and doing SDL work, I was the alternate for Juniper's board seat at the Trusted Computing Group, and that's where this came about. This group should be well known. It's a worldwide group, very active membership. They fundamentally develop work, protocols, support, integrated circuits, and so forth around that support trusted computing. The TPM standard, for example, I'm willing to bet you that every single phone and laptop in this room have a TPM chip, probably made by Infineon. So this stuff directly affects you. But what matters here is not so much about the TPM itself, but choosing to look at the Trusted Computing Group as a standards group and stuff that was going on there. And I'll remind you that last line down here, note well, these are competitors working together on a common goal. Okay, remember that, because that competitive circumstance constrains a lot of what happens here. Any questions? I'm really burning through this quickly, sorry. So everybody has vulnerabilities. I personally witnessed hallway conversations where people were talking about flaws and they were positing whether the other guy had the flaw or not, and do we tell them about it or not? And oh God, my alarm bells are going off in my head. We got very worried about how stuff might be mishandled, how you'd have uneven disclosure. Every sort of bad circumstance came to the fore. My employer gave me support for this, and we had some other like-minded board members. And so we launched into the creation of a vulnerability response subcommittee. We met for 10 months. We solicited feedback. I was really happy we got over 150 comments. And these weren't like, looks good, Jim. These were substantive comments with real content that was actionable. Using that, we composed what we called a vulnerability response framework. And the word framework is important because you don't want it to be too rigid or too constrained. So framework implies more of a guidelines approach. And within that framework, we recommended a vulnerability response team to be set up. It's insulated, separate from the board by the vulnerability response subcommittee. That provides a buffer between the two, and we did that on purpose. The members of the VRT are nominated by the board. They are typically employees of member companies, and then they're approved by VRS. After they are approved and put on the VRT, their membership and participation in the VRT outlasts any change in board membership. However, if the employer leaves TCG, then that VRT member's participation does end because there's no longer the membership relationship. So key things to note that came up in the review and are important for the rest of this talk. We're talking about, in most cases, resolving a report versus resolving a vulnerability. It's a very important distinction. We anticipated, and we were correct, that most of the stuff that comes in would involve a report of an issue that we could not directly address. We had to hand it off to someone else to fix it. There are circumstances where we would have vulnerability, but those were in the minority. Another important point was that the oversight committee was separate from the response team. The VRS is managerial, not hands-on, and the VRT does the heavy lifting. There was a misalignment of confidentiality expectations, and in short, I'll tell you that the people who work on standards group understand confidentiality, but not in the way that a vulnerability response team understands it. The PSIRT expectation is different. And last but not least, intellectual property is existential for a standards group. That really becomes the buck stops here sort of circumstance when you're dealing with vulnerability reporting and resolution. So we did have a major unforeseen obstacle, and I hinted at this in the write-up for the program. There were some number of members, including board members, who were alarmed. They thought that they were going to be relinquishing control over sensitive intellectual property. And we did anticipate that some people would do that, but we did not anticipate how intense and heated the concern would be. But suffice it to say, we had board members who found themselves in between TCG and their own employer, and fireworks that would erupt if there was a perception that they had given up control of some sensitive IP. So we managed to, it was a charm offensive, we managed to allay their concerns and move beyond that. Any questions so far? So roles and responsibilities. Fundamentally, the members of the VRT are PSIRT people from their own employer. We don't want subject matter experts to be handling cases. They may be involved, but fundamentally, the people that are on the VRT need to be experts at incident response, and specifically experts at product security incident response. On the flip side, the folks on the VRT are not going to have the technical knowledge, and especially with TCG, you get into some pretty wild stuff with the crypto and other similarly deep topics. So we knew we were going to need to interact with SMEs. The problem is that in the general case, if you go ask a subject matter expert from a working group to help you out, and you don't frame any constraints around the email that you send them, and you say, hey, can you help me out with this issue? There's a chance that they'll write back and say, no, I can't, but Frank over here can help you. And he's already carbon copied Frank on it. And it turns out that Frank was the least likely person you wanted involved in an incident. He was a disaster on a previous one. So these interactions with SMEs begin with a careful dance. You reach out to the SMA. I got a topic that I need to work on with you. I mean, this is the VRT, so they're already excited. I got a topic I need to work with you on. I need to make sure that you understand these constraints on information sharing. If you can't help with this, reply to me only and don't share it with anyone else. If they are willing to help, then good, you're off and running. If they say, no, I can't, then we go to the next person in the list. So is that clear? That part's really important. If you don't take away anything else and you're new to product security incident response, take that away because that'll help you on an incident later, I guarantee you. So team staffing and oversight, we decided the ideal number of incident responders on the VRT would be between 4 and 6 people. Currently, I'm told, because I'm not directly on the team anymore, currently I'm told there's 5 people on the VRT. As I mentioned earlier, they're nominated by a board member and approved by the VRS, and the membership outlasts any board involvement. The VRT members, the VRT itself operates like any other work group, so there's administrative stuff that goes on. The members of the VRT choose from themselves who will be chair and co-chair, and they have support from admin and so forth, I'll mention in a moment. When an incident comes up, there's actually a plain text file that has the names of the VRT members listed in it in order, and as each new incident comes up, TCG admin opens up that file and takes the next name off the list and crosses over the one above it and assigns the issue to that person. If they can't handle that issue, then it goes to the next one. It's a real simple allocation scheme, round robin. Maybe it was an allocation scheme. I don't know. So there are several issue types worth noting. The most obvious and most frequent one is a vendor product flaw. In other words, a member's system has a vulnerability in it. You would notify the affected member, but really important here, you need to figure out if there are other members who are affected, because it would be terrible to publish and proceed with one member getting a fix and the other ones are still caught out in the cold. That would not be good. And this is the part where I talk about resolving a report. That's the bulk of the stuff that they get, is resolving a report, just like that. There's a possibility that the report involves one of the specifications or a reference document. So this is the actual documentation that says how it's all supposed to work. It's happened. There have been defects, typos, and other stuff in some of the specifications that would lead to a vulnerable condition. When you're dealing with that, that's something that TCG does own outright, and the PSIRT team would handle that as a normal product security incident. So that's no different than regular product security incident work. Third category is TCG reference code. And I'll tell you, nobody's supposed to run reference code, but stuff happens. And they do run it, and it's sort of looped carefully with that previous one, since the reference code is based on the reference document. But same issue, if that happens, you would proceed as a typical PSIRT case. But that one's pretty rare. I think it's happened at least once. Where's Blake? I don't see him. He might know. Non-TCG issues. We would get messages asking people about implementation questions or specification questions. Sometimes that would hinge on a potential vulnerable issue, but not an actual vulnerability. If we could figure out where to send that, we would notify the work group chair for the appropriate work group and let them, just hand it off and let them take care of it. There's the resolving the report. And of course, there were also non-TCG vulnerabilities. If you put a website up there about security and you have an email address, sooner or later, people are going to send you stuff that you don't have any control over, and they'll be looking for an answer. So if you can figure out who to send it to, we'd do that, but otherwise, let it go. Multi-party coordination becomes important. It's possible that an issue will be larger than the TCG and larger than you can handle. It may be an industry-wide issue. In that circumstance, it makes sense to escalate it to one of the large coordinating parties. This could be Vince, but we intentionally wrote the policy generically so that we could go to, Tomo with JPSIRT, for example, or there's multiple teams now where there used to be one. There are folks in Europe and Asia, as well as North America, who can handle a multi-party issue. Conversely, we might be in the circumstance where a multi-party issue is known outside and it might affect TCG and contact would happen. There's no surprises there. An incident manager would be selected and take it on. The one circumstance that really worries me is where you have a really big incident and an outside coordinator is working with individual TCG members, all of whom have actually also reported it internally. And now you've got the internal vulnerability response team working on it, and you may have a misalignment about who's been told what and how much they've been shared. That is going to be a potential nightmare and calls for a lot of flexibility, grace, and common sense, as I mentioned there. So administrative support. The VRT is essentially a work group, just like any other, with a couple of constraints. One of those constraints is you can't get in unless you're nominated to be a member of the VRT. That sort of runs contrary to the way most standards groups operate. If your employer is a member, any of your coworkers can join, and they can typically join any work group they want. That doesn't happen here. TCG admin provides the administrative support just like they do to the rest of the group. In this case, instead of all of TCG admin, could be 10 or 12 people possibly, there's one person who's assigned to work with the VRT. And again, it's just like their usual work, except that they also need to know about incident response tooling and the things that they need to do to manage that. They manage the signal group, for example. They manage the availability of the PGP key and so forth. In terms of tooling for the team itself, it's no different than a regular incident response team. You got a /security page that tells people how to engage with the group. There's channels for reporting issues. TCG admin is watching all of that and activates the VRT as needed. Team members know how to use PGP. They know how to score stuff with CVSS and label stuff with TLP, and they know how to use signal group. Worth note, there's no need for TCG's operation to become a CNA. Issues are far, few and far between, and it would be silly to go to that work. Virtually every member of the VRT, their own employer is already a CNA, and if you needed a CV, you could just go to one of them. Blake tells me that in reality, nobody's doing that because they don't want to own a TCG issue, so they're just going straight to the CVE program to get a label. Communications approvals and legal consultations, important areas that we had to address. One is in terms of publishing. It's a standards org. Intellectual property is king. The general rule is nothing is published that isn't signed off by the board. And this happens after all the other sub-approvals have occurred from the technical committee, the work group, and all the rest of that. That doesn't work when you have minutes or hours and you need to publish a security advisory quickly. So we arranged for any 2 officers instead of the full board of directors would be able to approve something that needed to be published or needed to be communicated externally, because this also could apply to email to some outside group or some other circumstance. We also realized that there would be an outsized dependence on legal counsel consultation. And again, for the general case, that's expensive. I think it's $200 an hour. That required board approval. We were able to arrange the board to pre-allocate some number of hours for VRT use in an emergency. I think it was $800 worth, so 4 hours or something like that. And that's been used. It has been used at times, but that enables more rapid response by the team, eliminates a hurdle. So what did we miss? We needed to review the existing crisis management plan for alignment, and technically that's still an open task, and I think I'm responsible for that even though I have not been on the team for over 2 years. I'm an invited expert with the team, and so I will be trying to re-up this stuff after in the next couple of weeks. I think it's important to review membership requirements for possible problems. That's something that I wish we had done early in the process. We've done a little bit of it, but technically it's still an open task. You want to make sure that you don't have problems, for example, sharing information or obligations that information be shared with third parties that you weren't aware of. And you'll find that by looking at the membership stuff. It's also important to understand TCG, for example, has multiple levels of membership and that with varying amounts of access and control over the organization. And so you need to be aware of those different levels. Last but not least, I think it's important to research the history of the organization for earlier flaws. You may find stuff. I was laughing with Brian earlier. I was the first PSIRT guy on the for Cisco, and I remember finding some stuff from the early 1980s in Cisco iOS that will probably never be fixed. But it's important to look for that stuff because you might find something that's actionable and needs to be addressed. So don't assume that it's just from this date forward. Look at the older stuff. So the VRT was officially stood up late summer in 2019. We estimated there would be 2 to 3 incidents per year. As of 2025, I'm told that there's an average of 1 to 3 annually. So pretty low rate. But the really cool part is every time I interact with TCG people, even though I've been away from it for a while, is they compliment me on doing the VRT. So that's been pretty cool. No negative comments since the team was stood up, just praise for the team, which is, I think it's the best way to do it. And so key takeaways in no particular order. Standards groups need a vulnerability process. It's about resolving a report versus a vulnerability. Engage with SMEs one-on-one with great constraint. That's a really important one. You'll need multi-party coordination internally. Intellectual property is existential. negotiate express processes for publishing and decision-making, review membership requirements, and keep separate the oversight group from the operations group, and protect the membership of the response team. And that's what I have for you.